So we're opening the second day of our event with what has now become a tradition at our Healthcare Summit, an interview with Frank Vandenbroucke, the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium and the Health and Social Affairs Minister. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you.
Belgium held the presidency of the Council of the EU during the first half of last year and arguably was the driving force behind some of the health policy issues we're seeing now in Europe. Among those changes are new legislative measures to tackle drug shortages, as well as a really renewed focus on preventing chronic diseases. Since our last summit, when I spoke to you a year ago, we've now seen the Commission's publish its proposal to tackle drug shortages. The Critical Medicines Act came out 100 days after the Commission started its new mandate, marking arguably quite a quick turnaround since your white paper on the subject 2 years earlier. This draft focuses largely on an overhaul of procurement and subsidies to boost domestic medicines production, but it has been criticised for its lack of ambition on stockpiling. So obviously, since Belgium was an architect of this proposal in the first place, I'd love to get your assessment of the Critical Medicines Act and where Belgium might be pushing for change in the Council.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, indeed. At this very moment, we are pretty worried about persistent shortages, problems our patients are confronted with, prescribing doctors are confronted with, pharmacists are confronted with, all over Europe. So this problem is really very, very important. But secondly, drug security is key to overall security. And so I would like to insist that this is not a party political issue. It's not an issue of, let's say, ideologies that are different between governments. It is in the interest of any citizen, of all governments, to organize drug security. And I'm worried that the awareness is lacking on that. And you see that in how the discussions are going. I think the Commission proposal for the Critical Medicines Act was okay. But we see that the ambition has been reduced during the ongoing negotiations on all levels. First of all, the idea of the Commission was to state very clearly that it's a strategic objective of the European Union to secure the supply chains of drugs. It's a strategic objective. That idea is now lost in the discussion. It should be reintegrated in the discussion that this is a strategic objective. Secondly, on the necessity to be able to reshore production of basic medicines, you need a legal framework that is up to the job, and you need funding for that. And it's clear that there is not really an awareness about the amount of funding you need to be able to work with. Thirdly, on the problem of procurement policies, if you want a well-organized market all over Europe, we have to fight the fragmentation and a number of shortcomings in the procurement systems that are applied in the member states. This is insufficiently addressed. Next, the problem of national stockpiles. The problem is that stockpiling on a national basis, if not well coordinated, it has a vicious, perverse effect. To use a metaphor, the stockpiles of the rich are the shortages of the poor. The stockpiles of large countries can be a reason why small countries have more shortages. And so we should coordinate the stockpiling strategies. There should be transparency around stockpiling strategies, and linked to that, the public service obligations, also for private companies in the pharmaceutical sector, are insufficiently reinforced. So yes, I am disappointed. After all the hard work done by the Commission services and by the Commission, first in the creation of the Critical Medicines Alliance, and all the stakeholders that committed themselves in industry, patient organizations, insurers, compared to that momentum, And also compared to the initial proposal by the Commission, what is now on the table is absolutely too weak. It's insufficient.
Thank you. It sounds like there's going to be some difficult discussions then happening in the Council and then following up through with the trilogues. I just want to focus on the stockpiling point that you mentioned there. You said there needs to be transparency in stockpiling. What would an effective stockpiling strategy look like for Europe? Should it be centralised? We heard yesterday on one panel a real strong call for centralised stockpiling, which would then be accessible to all of the member states who need it.
Not really. I think that's a bridge too far. I think joint procurement is one of the issues that is also, it's not the main worry I have. I think the discussion on joint procurement is also not really satisfactory because we should not make that too difficult. I think we need a threshold. For us, we could put a threshold at 6 member states in order to have some organization and some prudence in organizing joint procurement at EU level. But one should not make it too difficult. So the threshold to launch it should not be too high, but that's not the main issue. I think we do not need a large stockpile somewhere in Europe. That's not the idea. You need well-coordinated and transparent contingency stock policies and stockpiling policies. And you need clear public service obligations at the level also of the industry, both the producers, but also those who distribute drugs, because it's a whole chain of actors. And there must be transparency at every point in the chain. Public authorities should know where are the stocks, how important are the stocks at every point in the chain until a drug reaches the patient. And that is important, and that's an issue of transparency and public service obligation. I think the guiding idea should be that the patient comes first. And the patient should also come first, even when some national government thinks it's in their own interest to create a huge stockpile only for their national patients.
And I want to look at the sort of the effects of some of these measures. You talked about the need for reshoring production, the cost of these measures, so that and the affordability of medicines is an ever-present discussion. But can Belgium afford to, first of all, provide state aid to reshore manufacturing, and secondly, pay more for generics that aren't made in cheaper regions like the Southeast Asia?
It's a good question. As a matter of fact, we are not only a small country, we are in budgetary trouble, so we have to address also a problem of a public deficit. So the money is scarce, certainly in Belgium. However, I think we have to address the problem of pricing for basic medicines, at least for some basic medicines, and that's something we already decided. We need somewhat more upward flexibility, for instance, for generic antibiotics. Prices have been pushed to a level which is too low to be commercially viable for some products, not for all of them. And so we need somewhat more upward flexibility in the policies on prices for basic medicines. That's something we are already implementing. And indeed, that comes with a cost. It comes with a cost because you don't want patients to pay for that. So you need also then to reinforce your reimbursement. That comes with a cost, but in my 2026 healthcare budget, we have clearly identified this as one of our strategic priorities, and so there is room of maneuver for that, even in very difficult budgetary times. And as a matter of fact, I'm explaining also to public opinion that we are at this very moment deciding to make some drugs slightly more expensive or less cheap for patients, because we need money in a spirit of solidarity, both to accelerate the access to new innovative drugs, but also to secure the provision of some basic medicines in our country.
Interesting. And sticking with the funding models that we're looking at, I'm talking about the next multi-annual financial framework that the European Commission has put on the table. Health funding will draw from a pot in the Competitiveness Fund. It's a pot that is much larger today than the EU for Health budget, 22.6 billion versus 5.3 billion, but it will be shared with the bioeconomy and agriculture. Do you have any concerns about this framing for the new funding, the laser focus on competitiveness? Is that the right approach for health?
I think it's a fundamental mistake. Even if the amount of money is apparently much larger, the problem is that the objective of money you set aside for competitiveness is fundamentally different from the objective of money you identify as money for public health. Public health is about, indeed, health of citizens. It's about preparedness for pandemics. It's about, indeed, reshoring of the production of basic medicines. It's about drug security. This is important also in terms of having a competitive society. However, the first goal, the first objective of money for health is health, period. If you submerge it, if you amalgate it into a competitiveness fund, you start to serve other objectives, which are per se legitimate. But industrial competitiveness, industrial development is a different objective. And so I think it's a fundamental mistake. It's worrying, and it's unacceptable. And that's also the principal point of view of my government.
And will Belgium be pushing for a very different framing or sort of a setup of the next MFF?
Well, I don't want to go into the details of that discussion, but the principal position we have is that there should be an identifiable budget for health, however you organize it. And so merging money for health with money for competitiveness, that will be at the expense of public health. We will damage public health objectives, and that's not acceptable.
Ever since you were a student at Cambridge in your mid-20s, you've taken a very strong interest in the role of the welfare state and finding the right balance to support those who need help while encouraging individuals to also take responsibility for their own lives where they can. And you recently gave a lecture on this topic in Oxford. Europe has a proud history of helping those in need. When you look at Europe today, what's your assessment? Is competitiveness and reacting to crises and geopolitics a bit of a distraction from the long-standing work on the welfare systems?
That risks to be the case indeed, and it's one of the reasons why my lecture in Oxford was also for me important to set the record straight. People can read it on my website if they're interested. It was a lecture about collective action solidarity and the demands of solidarity, and then the personal but also the political responsibility. And indeed, one of the reasons which you can read, I would say, through the lines, because it was a kind of a more philosophical exposé, but indeed, one of the reasons why I think it's necessary to make that point about the necessity of collective action and solidarity, that is indeed, however important our industrial development is, and however worrying some of the challenges for our industry, and however important competitiveness and certainly defense is, when indeed you have to spend more on defense, when you have to support your industry, you simultaneously must be able to spend sufficiently on health and on social security. What we defend against Putin, but in a sense also against Trump, is democracies embedded in welfare states. That's what we are defending. That's what the Ukrainian people long for. It's democracy, it's democratic welfare states. But so we must maintain those welfare states. And when you have also to spend more on defense, it means you need more solidarity. This was the starting point of my lecture. We badly need more solidarity within each member state, given all those pressures. Aging, new drugs, defense spending, tight budgets. You need more solidarity within each member state and across the member states at EU level. So you must think very carefully about the demands of that solidarity and how you explain that to the public.
And how do you do that?
Well, I think it's important to say that everybody shares in that responsibility. What I developed in that lecture was finally an idea of co-responsibility. It means that many actors in society, many institutional actors, but also individuals have a bit of that responsibility to maintain this solidarity. Solidarity is a precious good, but it's also a vulnerable good. It's a public good. It's precious, but vulnerable. And so there is a co-responsibility with many actors to sustain it. And instead of blaming one another or immediately shifting to the us and them mode, which you very often have in discussions on social security, on misuse of social security, on activation policies, instead of immediately going into the us and them, they should do what they have to do first. Everybody has to do something. And that's what I explain in the lecture.
Thank you. I want to turn now to some of the major health challenges Europe's facing. As we just heard previously, an ageing population and growing rates of chronic diseases, but also stretched budgets, as we've been talking about, to cope with these problems. We understand that the cardiovascular health plan will propose to have taxes on ultra-processed and unhealthy foods and those high in fat, salt and sugar. Belgium was very keen to push through measures on non-communicable diseases during its presidency. So I wanted to get your reaction to the leaked draft that we've seen on the taxing of highly processed foods.
The what?
The cardiovascular plan to tax highly processed and unhealthy foods.
The idea that you can use taxation or price signals to nudge people, I think, is absolutely welcome. Obviously, the question is, how will you then use the proceeds of such a taxation policy? Will you only use it to fund certain industries, or will you use it to fund health policies? That's a bit of a debate, I think. But when it comes to using taxation to nudge people in the choices they make, I think that's welcome. However, I think we have something more basic to do. And let me take the example of vaping. We are confronted with an explosion in the numbers of young people attracted by vaping, by e-cigarettes. It's staggering how that is increasing everywhere in Europe. And what we see is an industry, which I think is in a sense a criminal industry, trying to make a new generation of young people, also children even, addicted to nicotine. It's that business model. You make people addicted to something and then you sell. It's a very easy business model if you ask me. There is only one solution. You should stop it completely. And so that's even not an issue of pricing. We increased excise duties on vapes to make them more expensive. But that's not sufficient. We should simply kill that market. And that's the reason why we decided in Belgium to ban disposable vapes. They are banned. Now I have a scientific advice, very well organized scientific advice on flavors, because that industry attracts young people and also children through all kinds of flavors. You name it, strawberry, apple, popcorn, but it's very bad chemicals they inhale. And so what I will do next, I announced that this morning, is that I want to copy the Dutch model. In the Netherlands, they only allow a tobacco flavor. All other flavors are banned. And that's what I would like to do in Belgium also. And by the way, I think we should pursue that as an EU policy. There's a lot of support for that. I was in Geneva on Monday. We have in Geneva at this very moment the conference of the parties for the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the FCTC instrument that is embedded in WHO. So we were in Geneva where we organized a ministerial roundtable on vaping. And I was delighted to see that Brazil, Uruguay, many other countries all over the world are really today taking action, strong action, against vaping. And so I think we should also do that at EU level. It's terrible. We are very gradually winning the fight against traditional tobacco products, but there's an industry that's found a new variety of the same criminal strategy to make people addicted to nicotine through vapes. And we have to stop it, simply stop it.
Thank you so much, Minister Vandenbroucke. We've run out of time, but I'm sure there's plenty more we could have talked about. Thank you for your time today. If you can all stay seated, we'll have Sarah Wheaton join us to prepare for our next panel on AI in healthcare. Thank you.